Yo, I hope you guys are doing fantastic today. In this video, we're going to be going over critical damage and critical hit chance in New World. Right now, there is a massive balance patch on the PTR currently ongoing. We just released a video about the fortified changes. Make sure you go watch that if you haven't already. I'll make sure to link that down in the description below. It could change your build in a major way. And now we are on to testing critical damage. This is one of the things that they put in the patch notes, and so we wanted to see exactly how this was going to work on the PTR. So I spent quite a lot of time testing. I wanted to share those results with you here in this video. So before we jump too deep into the numbers, I wanted to tell you guys the method to my madness. Every time I do a testing video, I always like to explain how I did it and what I did so that you guys can kind of grasp and understand what the test was and kind of why we were doing it. So in order to test this accurately, what I did was I got completely naked first on the PTR. I spec'd into 45 strength, 45 dex, and 45 con. The reason I spec'd into 45 of each of those is because I didn't want to hit the 50 bubble to get any kind of bonus, but I also wanted to spec into 45 because I wasn't sure what kind of weapons I had on live. So for example, if I had a hatchet that had dex on it and then I had another hatchet that had strength on it, this just made it even across the board. I could just do 45, 45, 45 and nothing would change. So once I got naked, I got all of my abilities respect. I had no abilities. I had the attributes that we just listed, no armor, no jewelry or anything like that, just so we could get base damage. Then I took 3 different weapons. I tested this with a hatchet, the sword, no shield, and the greatsword. I just grabbed these weapons at random. They were just the first ones I picked up, and so that's what we used to test the crit damage with. And then on the PTR, what we did is we got a baseline of non-crit damage from just a basic light attack. So we did that on the PTR, and then we tested crit damage in a few different ways, which we'll get into here in just a moment. And then we went over to the live server and we did the same exact thing. And whenever I tested all 3 weapons, I made sure that my base damage was the same exact base damage that we had on the PTR. And you'll see that whenever we look at the results of the test. So now let's jump in here and let's take a look at what we found. Also, before we jump in here, I wanted to show you guys one thing because I found this to be quite odd because it's a little bit contradictory from what I found whenever I was doing my testing. Now, this may be a situation that I just don't fully understand what the difference is between additive and multiplicative, maybe. I don't know. But if I'm wrong here, whenever we jump into the testing, please let me know in the comments below because I don't want to be giving out any misinformation. But to me, this statement just doesn't seem quite right. It says they changed critical damage calculation to be additive instead of multiplicative. So to me, this says that they are currently now on live is multiplicative, and then they're changing it to be additive. Whenever I did my testing, I didn't really find this to hold true, and I'll show you guys why I think that is here in just a minute. So for example, to me, this is what additive would mean. It would mean that we take something like the hatchet that has a 1.4 multiplier for critical hit damage. And then if we added a buff that gave us another 10% critical hit damage, and then another one that gave us another 10% from wherever, and then say we added keen awareness to get 12%, that would give us 1.72 or 72% additional damage whenever we landed a critical hit. To me, that's what additive is. You just add on top of the base critical damage multiplier, the additional critical damage that you are receiving. You just simply add. To me, I think that's what additive means. That's what I thought it meant. And I will show you why this is important here in just a minute. So here's what the entire spreadsheet looks like. I spent quite a lot of time testing crit damage, and we're going to go over this. I promise it's not as bad as it looks. We're going to break this down. I'm going to show you the results of what I found. So we're first going to take a look at what we did on live. So the first thing I did, once again, is we got a hatchet that was 600 gear score. We did 178 slash damage. We had no gear, no abilities. We were 45 strength, 45 dex, 45 con in every one of these tests. We had no additional perks in the hatchet. And for the live testing, the hatchet had a 1.4 multiplier with a 4% crit chance. Bear in mind, this is on live. So the first time we did this, I expected to see exactly what we got. So we did a non-crit of 729 damage. We did a crit hit for 1,021 damage for a difference of 292 for an increase of 40%, which is exactly what I think you would expect whenever you have a hatchet with a 1.4 multiplier or a 40% increase in damage. That's what you would expect. So I seen this and I was like, okay, well, we're on track. Well, then whenever you add the 10% extra crit damage, I expected for this to be multiplicative like we looked at a little bit earlier. To my surprise, that's not what we found. I found that on live, at least to my knowledge of additive and multiplicative, and again, maybe I'm just misunderstanding, I'm not sure, but to me, this is additive. We added 10% extra crit damage with a 50 intelligence passive. So again, we're doing 729 damage with a non-crit. The intelligence did not increase or scale up our damage with a hatchet. It only gave us the 10% extra crit damage from that passive. That's all we got. That's the only benefit we received from speccing into 50 intelligence. So again, we're doing 729 non-crit, 1,094 crit with a difference of 365, which then gives us a 50% increase total because we now have the 1.4 multiplier plus an additional 10%. which gave us an additional 50%. So to me, that added 10%, which is an additive action. It's adding the crit amount on top of the base damage amount. So it is additive. So then we took this even further to see how this was going to scale overall whenever you start stacking crit damage on top of each other. So now we have the 10% extra crit damage from the 50 imp passive, and then we slotted a vicious hatchet with no other abilities on there that were going to affect damage. And you can see that here with the non-crit being 729. So now this was also gear score 600. It was not 625. So the vicious was 11%. So you have the 1.4 multiplier plus 10% extra damage plus another 11% from vicious gives you a total of 61% more crit damage is what we would expect to see. We would expect it to be more than that though, because it's supposed to be multiplicative on live, but this is what happened. Whenever we did the test, we got 729 non-crit, 1176 crit with a difference of 447 and an increase of 61%. So again, it just added 11%, as you can see here. It added an additional 11% damage from the previous test. So then we proceeded to do this same thing on the PTR with the hatchet. We had a hatchet, 600 gear score, 178 slash damage, just as above. No gear, no abilities. 45 strength, 45 dex, 45 con. No additional damage perks on the hatchet. And the hatchet had a 1.4 multiplier or an 8% crit chance now on the PTR because they did increase the crit chance. And we're going to go over that here in just a little while as well. But this is what we found. We established our base of 729 damage, which is the exact same thing we did on live. So now we know we're on track. We're not doing any additional damage. Everything should be good. Well, with a 1.4 multiplier, I expected the same thing to happen on the PTR. I expected to have a 40% increase and then start scaling from there. That's not what happened. We did 729 non-crit. We did a 973 crit with a difference of 244. And the damage increase was only 33.47%. So there's some weird scaling happening there behind the scenes, even on the base crit, that reduces the amount of crit you're doing on the PTR currently. This is not exactly what I expected to see. I expected to see the differences come after you started stacking crit damage on top of the base, but that's not what we got clearly. We already have a reduction in crit damage just on the base amount of the hatchet. You're not getting a 40% increased damage. You're only getting 33.47%. So then what happens whenever we start stacking damage to that? Well, with 10% extra crit damage from the 50 imp passive, just like we did on live, this was the result. 729 non-crit and 1033 crit, 304 difference for 41.70% increase. So that is an 8.23% increase from before, which does appear to be an additive increase. It just seems like they are nerfing or some sort of calculation in there that's just strictly nerfing the amount of crit damage you do overall. So then we added 10% extra crit damage from the 50 imp passive, and then we also added a vicious hatchet for a total of 61% more crit damage. We did a 729 non-crit, an 1101 crit, and the difference was 372 to have a 51.03% increase or 9.33% from the previous step. So overall, we are getting a 51% increase, not a 61% increase. So it's roughly about a 10% nerf to crit damage on the hatchet with these two passives stacked. So now let's compare the two. You can see here, every non-crit was 729, both on live right here and on the PTR. So we did 33% increased damage with no other crit damage additives on top of the base. And then on live, we did a 40% damage, which is exactly what you would expect. There's a difference of 6.5%. You are losing about 6.5% damage on your hatchet just at base. Then whenever we started adding crit damage to it, you lost 8.37. So this was whenever we specced into the 50 imp passive and got 10% additional crit damage. We did 41.7 increased crit damage on PTR and then 50% increased crit damage on live, which is a decrease from live to the PTR of 8.37%. And then of course we added in the crit damage from the 50 imp passive and then added vicious on top of that for the last test. And there was a decrease in crit damage from live to the PTR of 10.29%. But I didn't want to stop there because I wanted to test some additional weapons that had different multipliers on there. So what we did is we went and we tested the sword. So on the PTR, we used a sword that was 600 gear score, 181 slash damage. Again, no gear, no abilities. We did the same 45 strength, 45 dex, 45 con. No additional damage perks in the sword, and the sword had a 1.3 multiplier. So if we take what we learned from the previous test, we would expect to see a 30% increase on the sword, and then we'd expect to see an additive version added on top each time we added additional crit damage, which is exactly what we've seen. With the sword, we established a baseline of 741, and with the first test, we hit a 30% increase, which is exactly what you would think you would hit. And then whenever we added 10% extra crit damage on top of this from the 50 imp passive for the sword, we received an additional 10% crit damage. So we added 10% crit damage on top of the 30%. So now we're at 40% crit damage, which is exactly what you would expect after testing the hatchet. We did the same thing with the vicious and with the 10% extra crit damage from the imp passive, and we got an increase of 11%, which is exactly what you would expect. So the sword ended up working out exactly how would you expect, just as the hatchet did on the live server. So then we did the same thing on the PTR. We established a base damage of 741, just like we did on live. So everything was the same. We didn't change anything. And what we seen was very similar results to the hatchet. We see a immediate nerf from the base damage going from 30% to 24.97%. So you're losing about 5% crit damage just at base. And then whenever you add additional 10% crit damage, it goes down to 33.33%. And then whenever you add crit damage and vicious, it goes down to 42.65%. Now let's compare the sword on the PTR versus the sword on live. So whenever we test the sword on PTR, again, we got 25% increase of crit damage, and then we had a 30% increase. So you're getting a reduction of 5% damage from the PTR to live currently. Then whenever you start scaling up, it goes to a reduction of 6.61%, and then it goes to 8.50%. So if we compare that to the hatchet, which is right here, you can see the hatchet has a 6.5 reduction, 8.37, and a 10.9. The sword's isn't quite as severe, but I think that's because the sword already starts off with 10% less crit damage at base than the hatchet did. So that's why you see a less severe nerf to crit damage on the sword than you do on the hatchet. Now let's take a look at the great axe. This is the last weapon that I tested. So we used a 600 gear score great axe, 181 slash damage, no gear, no abilities. In this test, we only used 5 strength, 45 con. We found 2 great axes that only had con on them, so we didn't add any strength or any damaging attributes to this test. And we had no additional damage perks in the great axe, and then the great axe had a 1.3 multiplier. So this is where things got a little bit interesting, because I did find a bug that is currently on live with the great axe. So if you're a great axe user, you are essentially getting an additional 10% crit damage for free right now. The great axe is supposed to have a 1.3 multiplier on live. It in fact has a 1.4 multiplier on live, which we're about to find out right now. So we set our base at 675 non-crit basic attacks, and then whenever we crit, without adding any additional crit damage, we have a 40% increase, which right there, based on what we know before with the hatchet and the sword, this should have been 30%. It is in fact 40%. I tested this multiple times to make sure I wasn't going crazy. Also looked at the tooltip a few times to make sure I wasn't going crazy. You are getting 40% increase, and the great axe is supposed to have a 1.3 multiplier. So great axe users, you are getting 10% free extra crit damage on live right now. But sad for you guys, this is getting fixed in the PTR, and we're about to take a look at that here in just a moment. But if you look at this, you can see that this scales up just like the hatchet and the sword do. It is in fact additive, or at least what I think is additive, because they say it's multiplicative. I still think this is additive. I'm not sure, but either way, it follows the same pattern as the other two weapons do, only it's at a 10% increased rate, more than what it should be. So now let's take a look at the results that we got from the PTR. You can see here we still have 675 base, just as we did up here, and the damage increase is 24.89%. So you can see the great axe has a 1.3 multiplier. This is exactly what we'd expect to see based on the testing we did for the sword. Would have been a 5% decrease in base crit damage, which is exactly what's happening here. But because the great axe is bugged on live, on the PTR, you see a major reduction from live to PTR. So great axe users, your crit damage is about to get reduced very heavily whenever this patch hits live. If this patch does in fact hit live like this, then you have the 10% increased crit damage from the 50 and passive, and it follows the same exact pattern. The same pattern we've seen from the other ones. So now we'll take a look at the comparison, just like we did for the other two weapons. And as you can see here on the PTR, it's 24.89%. You can see here that on live, it is 40%. So there's a 15% difference. So your base crit damage is about to get nerfed by 15%, which is a massive crit damage nerf for the great axe, but that is because it is not accurate currently on live. So great axe, you're about to get severely nerfed, but this is it. I don't know what it's like for the other weapons. I didn't go through the trouble of testing every single weapon. I only did these 3, so I have no idea if there's any other examples like this, but nonetheless, this is what we found. And then if you take a look at the sword right here that we just looked at, the damage differences would follow pretty much the same exact pattern as the sword, from a 1.3 damage multiplier on your critical hits. it would follow pretty much the same exact damage, because this would be 30%, this would be 40, and this would be 50, which would then make your percentages more along the lines of the sword, or pretty much exactly like the sword. So what that means is if the great axe wasn't bugged, you would receive the same type of reduction that the sword is receiving, or along those lines. So overall, the conclusion for crit damage is that it's just getting nerfed, just like we expected. It's getting nerfed in a way that was a little bit different. I didn't expect the calculations to work out quite like this, but nonetheless, it is getting nerfed, and it looks like it's getting nerfed from a range of roughly 5 to 10% if we take a look at those comparison charts. And it does look like the higher base crit damage that a weapon has, the more that it's going to be affected from the PTR to live. But I did perform one more test, and that was a test to see how critical chance worked, because that is getting affected as well. If we go back over here to the patch notes, we can see that they are adjusting critical hit chance to no longer increase by your total critical hit chance for every non-critical that occurs. Now the chance will only increase by the weapon's base critical hit chance for each non-critical that is triggered. Increase base critical chance on Fire Staff, Void Gauntlet, and Ice Gauntlet by 6%, on the bow by 2%, and on all other weapons by 4%. This is to compensate for this kind of forgiveness that you get whenever you don't crit. So right now on live, if you hit a non-crit, you get a better chance to crit on your next attack. So I wanted to test this to see exactly how much of a difference this would make, because now you should get roughly a, whatever their percentage crit is on a particular weapon, say it's 7% crit chance, you should get roughly 7 out of 100 crits on that weapon. That's how it's supposed to function on the PTR, and you should no longer get this type of forgiveness for your non-crits. So I did test that, and I want to share those results with you guys here. So I only tested this on the great axe and the hatchet. I did not bother testing this on the sword, but here's what I found. So these results were for the hatchet, and they were quite surprising. According to the patch notes, we should now only see an 8% chance to crit if that's the only thing you have. If you're not running keen awareness, if you're not running keen, if you're not running anything else to enhance your chance to crit, any passives in your tree, you should get truly an 8% chance to crit. Well, that's not really what happened on the PTR. So I don't know if this is going to get changed in the future. It could, because remember, all of this is on the PTR, and all of this is still subject to change. This is what I found nonetheless. I hit a dummy in chunks of 10, and then I counted the amount of crit hits that we hit in those chunks of 10. And you can see here that we hit far more than 8%. We hit 25%. I did this 100 times. We hit 25% on the PTR, which was really high. I had no keen awareness, nothing like that, just the base hatchet. Then I did add keen and keen awareness, and I hit for 39%. You're supposed to hit for 30 after adding everything up. I hit for 39, which was roughly in the same neighborhood as 30, about what you would expect. I could have just gotten lucky, hit an extra 9 times, and pushed that up to 40. So that was within an acceptable range to me for having 30% on there, and then adding keen awareness. That looked like that was accurate. This did not look very accurate to me. I don't know why this happened. So then I tested the great axe to see if this was maybe just a fluke, or if something just really isn't working right. So here were the results for the great axe. Again, I did this in lumps of 10, and I hit the dummy 100 times. The great axe should have a 7% chance to crit, so I expected to see something along those lines. And here you can see it was more than double, which kind of blew my mind a little bit. Then whenever we added keen awareness on there, I hit 35%, which is within the acceptable range to me. I thought that was pretty acceptable. That was very close, and pretty much what I expected to see. 7% and 16% at base was not, that was a little bit high. So I'm not real sure what's happening with crit hit chance at base. It seems like it's tuned up just a little bit, and I was not expecting this. I was expecting more along the lines of 7 to 10% for the great axe, and I was expecting to have some zeros in here from my clumps of 10 hits, and that just didn't happen. I crit hit every single time in clumps of 10, which I found to be pretty surprising. I just did not think that was going to be the case at all. So now let's take that information and let's compare it to what we've seen on live. So on the live server, we did the same exact test. We did clumps of 10, 100 hits on the dummy, and this is what we found. With no keen awareness, no other buffs, we hit the dummy 16 times for crits with a 4% chance, which is about what I expected to see because of the forgiveness feature that's built into live. So that really wasn't a surprise to me. And then on keen awareness, you can see we almost doubled our percentage at 50% versus the 27%. That also wasn't that much of a surprise to me because of the way crits work on live now. So now let's take a look at the great axe testing that we did on live. The great axe has a 3% chance to hit on live, and we crit for 17%, which again is quite high. However, you do have the forgiveness, so I expected it to be higher. I wasn't quite expecting 17%. That's quite a lot. And then 53% of the time, we crit with a great axe whenever we had keen and keen awareness on, which was absolutely bonkers to me. Those are the results. That's what I found, and it was pretty mind-blowing to me. I expected PTR results to be much less. They were not. So to me, it seems like right now they have a little bit of work to do to adjust the keen crit chance, unless there's something they're not telling us behind the scenes and they want it to crit more at base damage, and they only want it to scale up to actual numbers whenever you add keen and keen awareness to your gear for some reason. I'm not real sure, but those are the results. That's what I found for crit damage and critical hit chance. So it looks like crit damage is getting nerfed about 5 to 10% and possibly even more on some weapons, and then critical hit chance is kind of a little bit mind-blowing. It looks like keen may be something that you see pop back up into the meta. I would hang on to your keen weapons because it does look like they are going to have a pretty big effect on your chance to crit hit, obviously with the way they're doing the new calculations. But that's it. That's the results I found, and I just wanted to share them with you guys. I hope you guys found some value in this video. I hope now you understand how crits are going to work from the PTR to live. And again, I want to very much caution you that this is on the PTR. So this could be something that has changed from the PTR to live. All of this is subject to change, but those are the results as of now. If something does change, I'll try to make another video or follow-up video to share with you guys. But that's it. This did take me quite a while to prepare. I did a lot of testing for crits on the PTR, trying to get my weapons right, trying to make sure the testing was correct on live versus the PTR, swinging my weapons hundreds of times at the dummies, at the practice dummies to test all of this stuff. So I greatly appreciate it if you liked and subscribed the video. It helped me out a ton. And that'll do it for this one, boys and girls. Thank you guys so much for watching. Oh, and if you like New World content, please come hang out with us every Monday through Friday, 8 o'clock a.m. CST over twitch.tv/BDLG. I'm there streaming every Monday through Friday. We like to have a good time over there. We talk about a lot of stuff, just talk about life in general. We enjoy New World to the fullest, and we play a few other games occasionally. But that's it, boys and girls. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. I appreciate you a whole lot. Hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next one.